everybody involved. I think it's in the self-interest of Ukraine. I think it's in Russia's self-interest, and I think it's in the self-interest of the West either.
And where do you see India in all of this?
So I think it is important. I think the relationship between India and the United States can be mutually beneficial vis-a-vis China.
Were you disappointed when you went into the presidency race and ultimately didn't quite work out this time? Were you disappointed personally? And are we looking at Vivek Ramaswamy doing this now in 2028?
So was I disappointed? I'm a human being. Of course I was.
Have you met with Indian Prime Minister Modi? And how would you describe him?
I would love to meet him. I haven't met him yet. I've met with a number of other world leaders and prime ministers.
Are you worried about what will happen in November? There is one-of-a-kind elections that we're seeing. President Joe Biden was in the running, and then halfway through Kamala Harris comes in, and now polls say what they say about the advantage to Kamala Harris. Are you worried about the Republican campaign being on the defensive?
Look, I think that we're going to be at our best if we offer our own vision of what we stand for. I think it's insufficient to just criticize the other side. You got to do some of that in politics, right? There's a room for that. But that's insufficient to win. I think we can't just say this is what the left offers and we're against it. We have to go further, do more than that, and say this is what we actually stand for. This is what it means to be a Republican. This is what it means to be an American. I think people are hungry for that. And if we identify what our own values are, as I said, individual, family, nation, God, merit, free speech, the rule of law, and self-governance. If we say this is not what we're running from, but this is what we're running to, I think we will win this election handily. But I do think that we have a competitive race all the way through November. I'm not a soothsayer. I can't tell you, I'm not going to offer you a definitive prediction of what's going to happen. But I do believe the next 45 days are going to be pretty important for the future of the country.
So you think there is a gap in the narrative of the Republicans?
I think there's always room for, there's many gaps on the Democratic side, but I'm always a believer, even in my own life, in looking myself in the mirror and not resting on my laurels, but asking how can we be better? How can we aspire to even greater? There's the saying here, it's obviously very popular, and I'm enthusiastic supporter of making America great again. But I don't just want to make America great again. I want to make America greater than it has ever been. Joint military exercises with China. I'd like to see Russia exit its military presence in the Western Hemisphere, places like Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba. So I think that there's an opportunity for not a small deal, but a big deal. Really resetting the alliances between Russia and China. I think we got to dissolve and weaken that diplomatically, and I think that we can strengthen it. And I think the Ukraine war provides a catalyst, or the end of the Ukraine war, I should say, provides a catalyst to bring us to hopefully not only peace there, but a more stable world order.
And where do you see India in all of this?
I think it is important. I think the relationship between India and China, between India and the United States, can be mutually beneficial vis-a-vis China. I think China presents a major threat to both India's security in the future as well as the long-run security interests of the United States. One of the areas where the United States is really under a barrel is that many of our essential sectors, even our own military, our pharmaceutical supply chain, our industrial base supporting our military, depend on China for those essential parts of our way of life. It makes no sense from an American perspective that our own military should depend on China for our way of life or our own military. That doesn't make sense. So I think there could be opportunities when we think about production and trade relationships between the U.S. and India, where that could be mutually beneficial both to the U.S. and India and provide greater stability. I think a closer relationship and understanding, God forbid, what happens in a China-Taiwan scenario in the future, knowing what side India falls on in that scenario, I think can actually prevent that conflict if that's clear from the outset. So I do think there's room to grow and build on the U.S.-India relationship.
What about the statements made by Donald Trump about immigrants? What does that do for you in terms of the freedom and, people like your parents who came and made a future for themselves and became part of America and the big American dream? How do you stand on that?
Well, look, I think there's a big distinction between illegal immigration into the country, which is really a border security issue, versus the separate policy question of legal immigration in the country. Donald Trump has been a hardliner. Frankly, I have been a hardliner on illegal immigration. I think a nation without borders is literally not a nation. India has an advantage in this regard. Many of its borders are with oceans, but it has land barriers on the north as well, and that's been a difficult issue, but mountainous borders to the north. For reasons that it may not be as present in the Indian context. In the American context, it's a big deal. The southern border is wide open. The northern border, you've actually seen even more illegal crossings. And I think if you're going to add value to America and do it legally, then I do think that we are a country that has a great tradition of assimilating immigrants from countries around the world to make America stronger and more effective. We're not doing that well today. Right now, our immigration system sadly rewards those who are willing to be dishonest, to lie, to say they're coming for asylum or for refugee status, when in fact those aren't the reasons why they're coming. Instead, I'd like to see an immigration system that rewards those who are going to make the greatest contributions, those who are going to be able to be civic attached to the United States as well, share our national ideals, speak the language. I think those are actually the kinds of immigration policies we need in this country that we are missing today.
You still haven't commented on the cats and dogs.
Well, look, I say this because I prefer substance, right? The media has a field day with this. I don't blame you for this, but the American media has a field day with this where they will pick on one thing that Donald Trump says and make that the issue instead of the actual substance of the issue, which nobody's talking about. And in some ways, it's irresponsible, I think, to focus on one fringe aspect of a discussion while ignoring the actual main plot. If you want to go this direction, you could pick many things that Kamala Harris has said or Joe Biden has said and create a scandal out of that too. I think we'd rather actually just confront the hard issue itself. What should the immigration policy of the United States be? My view is you can't enter illegally. The economy is important. The border's important. All of these issues are important. But I think a foundational issue is a revival of that national identity and sense of national pride in the United States of America. And I think that's a big part of my mission, both during my own campaign and in what I do next as well.
So let me ask you, this identity, this idea of trying to be part of something bigger than oneself that you speak about, national pride that you speak about, these are some of the things that form the basis of Narendra Modi's success as a politician, leading him up to the prime ministerial level over the last 3 elections. Commonality there is coincidental or value system based?
I think it's values based. I admire a number of leaders in other countries, and PM Modi is obviously high on that list, of people who have taken pride in their own country. I think that's a good thing for a citizen of a nation to be grounded. We as human beings, we need to belong to something bigger than ourselves. Individual, family, nation, and God, I think, are more powerful as a message than race, gender, sexuality, and climate. Certainly, I'm speaking from a U.S. perspective, but those principles apply to other countries too. I think people want to know I'm a citizen of this nation. That means something to me. Not a nebulous global citizen vaguely fighting climate change somewhere. But here in the American context, a citizen of the United States of America, that I'm proud of that's grounded in ideals. I've gotten to know other world leaders in the last year as well. Take a leader like Giorgia Meloni in Italy. She's become something of a friend. Somebody who revived Italian national identity. I think in the same way, Modi has been a successful leader in reviving that sense of Indian pride and self-confidence in India. I do think that's an important point. That self-confidence was missing. When I visited India in the 1990s, coming from America, there was a kind of inferiority complex. I'm speaking bluntly, but a psychological sense of inferiority. And I think that a great leader of a nation, not a good leader, but a great leader of a nation, can revive that sense of pride and conviction in oneself, in one's own identity, in one's nation's identity.
That truth always wins. But then it has to be truth and not misinformation, because a lot of that that is floating in social media is also misinformation. So how does anybody deal with that, especially in politically charged times like these?
So I personally don't believe, and I think history teaches us to be rightly skeptical of central determinations of truth. I think that we human beings, we're not God. We don't have a unilateral, no human being has a unilateral monopoly on deciding what is or isn't true. And so when the CEO of a social media company or a traditional media company or a government tries to decide what does or doesn't count as true, that's a failure of hubris. It is what I would call a fatal conceit, actually. And history teaches us that model might feel comfortable or convenient in the short run, but in the long run it leads societies to do terrible things. And you can even look at the course of human history. Name one time in human history where the guys fighting to censor speech ended up being the good guys in the end. I'll wait, and I don't think we're going to find very many examples.